This is my review of All the President's Men by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. One of the chapters in the book that I found memorable was actually chapter 1, mostly because of the dramatic irony that we can see in the chapter, because now in the present we know that the break-in at the Watergate Hotel, the event that precedes chapter 1, would eventually snowball into this whole big political scandal that would essentially cause Nixon to resign, the first time a president has resigned in American history. But in the moment, in chapter 1, when Woodward hears about the break-in, he initially doesn't think it's going to be a big thing. He was not looking forward to the story at all. He just thought it was going to be a typical crime story. So I think the biggest takeaway in this chapter is never assume anything, and no matter how crazy a news tip sounds, look into it anyway, because I feel like if Woodward had treated this as just a typical crime story, and if he hadn't considered the fact that, what people were implying about, the president being behind it, it would never have become, the big thing it is today in American history. I also found this chapter memorable because a lot of the times when I go into covering a story, I think it's going to be either super awesome or super boring, and I feel like I would have thought the same way as Woodward did, when he first heard about this story, because, crime isn't really my favorite beat, and I feel like if I were assigned to a crime story, I would just okay, get the facts, write the story, move on. But I feel like the better thing to do in that situation would actually be more open to looking into different angles and pursuing new paths and not just getting the facts, because you never know if it's gonna lead up to something bigger. And while Woodward and Bernstein are investigating this whole scandal, a lot of the information they use comes from an anonymous source. And this anonymous source impacts the reporters by giving them information that other sources would be reluctant to give if they knew they would be named. We see multiple times in the book that Woodward and Bernstein, when they talk to some people who they think, may know something about Watergate or the accusations that they keep uncovering about people in the White House, other sources are very reluctant to talk, and the reporters find themselves, having to jump through all these hoops to get them to give them at least some information. I think one of my favorite scenes in the book was when one of them is trying to confirm or deny an allegation, and he's on the phone with somebody. He's okay, I'm gonna wait 10 seconds and then hang up the phone. If you don't think I should publish this, just say anything. It doesn't matter what you say. And of course that plan completely backfires, and they publish the wrong thing because the source misunderstood the instructions. So that's where I think the anonymous source really helped, and ironically he helped to clarify a lot of things even if he was never named. But the whole use of anonymous sources brings up some ethical issues which still continue to this day, and that's really what I would tell a future student about this book, because even though it happened in the 1970s, the issues it discusses are still relevant today, because this is a story that the government does not want to get out. This isn't the first time a newspaper has clashed with the United States government, and it definitely won't be the last. Even news sites and news organizations are still clashing with the government to this day. And if you've taken media law, you probably know this more than me. You've probably studied a lot of court cases, New York Times v. U.S., New York Times v. Sullivan, all the pivotal freedom of the press court cases, and of course Nixon v. U.S. that came out of this whole story. So even though technology has changed and the infrastructure of news has changed, the methods in which Woodward and Bernstein try to preserve the freedom of the press, even against the government, and whereas normally the press and the government should really be working together for their citizens and their constituents. The methods in which they use to preserve the freedom of the press are really important. Also, the book does not end with Nixon resigning. I thought the book was going to end with Nixon resigning, but by the time they had finished writing this, Nixon was still in office. So that really surprised me. And I think that just says a lot about the book. The story hasn't even, climaxed at the end of the book, and it's still a really good narrative.